Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about drawing with a dip pen and a few little tips to try and remember. As beginners we're often a little bit afraid of using a dip pen in case we make a mistake because obviously the ink is permanent, and if we make a mistake we're worried that that's going to spoil the whole drawing, and if you've spent half an hour or an hour doing a drawing you don't want to then spoil it and have to abandon it. But don't abandon it. There are things you can do to save your painting or your drawing if you've made a mistake with your ink. So this is the pen that I use, and those of you that are regular to my channel have probably seen this before. As you can see by the state of it, I've had this for years. I really like it, and it's really an expressive way of doing your drawings. I'll just show you the difference between drawing with an ordinary drawing pen. So we just do a few lines, even varying the pressure on the pen or the angle. There's very little difference in those lines, they're very uniform. Whereas with a dip pen, I'll just open my ink and load the pen. By varying the pressure and varying the angle, you can get a lot of variety in those lines, from very, very fine to quite thick. Much more interesting and expressive than the ordinary drawing pen. So the ink I usually use is this one, which is Rowney FW acrylic ink, and that one's a black. I often use the sepia as well, but it's a permanent one and it's a light fast one, so that's a good one to use, and you can then paint over the top of it as well if you wanted to. So before you even begin your drawing, there are two things that you want to have to hand. One is a pot of water, and the other one is some tissue, and you'll also need a brush, a nice synthetic sturdy brush, and some tissue. So if you do halfway through your drawing make a blodgy mess and end up with a few dots, the temptation is to get your tissue and try and blot that out. And we see what a mess that makes when you try and do that, and that's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of. So instead of doing that, get your tissue and get the corner, the very tip of the tissue, and just gently lower it into the ink without touching the paper, and allow that ink to flow up the tissue. So you've got to be patient in getting all that ink out. And can you see how it's drawing it up the tissue? That way the only bit that's marked on the paper is where the initial spill was. Whoops. As you can see, I've been making a mess while I've been practicing this as well. Once you've got rid of all that, you can then have a go at lessening it with a little bit of water on your brush. Just a damp brush. There's a lot more there than I thought there was. Sorry, this is taking longer than I anticipated. But this is where we need patience. When we don't have patience, it's when we end up making a mess. So don't panic when you go wrong and think that it's not rescuable, if that's a word. Once you get to the stage where it's nearly dry, but still a little bit damp, you can then get a damp brush. This works better on a watercolour paper than it does just on this ordinary cartridge, but you can lift some more out with your brush. Very, very gently. Don't rub the paper too much, especially if it's a cartridge like this. If you've got a really high quality tough paper, you'll be able to do this much more than you will on this paper. But you can lift as much of that out as possible, and it's going to make it much easier to rescue later. Once you've lifted as much as you can out and you're in danger of spoiling your paper, stop and leave it to dry and come back to it later. So depending on the drawing and the medium and what paper you're using, there are different ways of rescuing this. If it's on a watercolour paper and you're going to be putting paints over the top of it, you might be able to incorporate it into the drawing. You might not have to do too much with it at all. If it's a drawing and you just want to keep it as a drawing, you might want to rescue it and cover it up. This isn't actually dry yet, so I'm not going to go over the top of that, but this is one thing you can have. This is a white Pitt pen. So I'll show you on these ones here. You can go over with the Pitt pen. Now it might need to dry and then have another layer, but eventually you can cover it up with that. A better option is to go over with some acrylic ink. So I'll just pretend this is my palette for now. So with a nice clean brush, I said acrylic ink, I meant acrylic paint. You could use acrylic ink. Having said that, I do have an acrylic ink in these same brand in white, and that's also quite a good way of covering up. In fact, I'll get that out in a moment. Again, you can see it's coming through, so you want to leave that to dry and then put a second layer over the top. This perhaps isn't, no, that's not quite dry, but you can see how we could cover up with that. Okay. Excuse me, I did just go off there to go and have a look for that acrylic ink and I can't find it. So, but like I say, with these two, let them dry and then come over with another layer, and you can see how you can get rid of that black. The coverage on the paint is much better than the coverage with this pen, and I do find that over time the nib gets quite dirty and you have to clean it off. This is good if you've just got one little area where you just want to perhaps put a nickel line through or something, just to cover up a tiny bit, whereas I would use the paint if I wanted to cover up more. Okay, so that's things to remember. You can rescue things. You could also go over with a white pastel, that will cover it up. So really the thing about mixed media is you can try all different things to carry on and rescue your picture rather than abandoning it. Don't abandon it. If you've got a nice drawing there, just keep going with it and enjoy what you're doing. Okay, so I'll put these things to one side now, and I'll have a go quickly at drawing this leaf. It's just one I've just popped outside to get. I think it's off the Rowan. Another thing I should have said with these ones is you will also have seen me, especially in my own paintings, using the tip of the dropper to draw as well. So I'll quite often draw using that, and you can be very, very expressive with that. And what you can do with that is, if you get a mess like this where you've put far too much ink on, if you squirt it out into the bottle, so you've got that compressed and you've got an empty pipette, put the tip of it into that and then release it and suck some of that ink up, and you can see there that's the ink that I've drawn up. Do that again. That does two things. You're not wasting your ink, costing money, but also it makes it much easier to get rid of that mess. Because one thing with these acrylic inks, if you leave it to dry naturally where it's very thick like that, it can sometimes end up with a little bit of a cracked effect over the top of it, and it ends up a little bit shinier than the rest of the ink where it's very, very thick. So you don't want thick areas like that drying on your painting, because you get that shiny effect which catches the light, and you don't always want that. Whoops. So again, it's being patient and drawing up that ink. But that's a lovely way to draw as well. You get some very expressive lines. In fact, I might use that whilst I'm doing this leaf as well as the pen. So I'll go ahead now and have a bit of a play with the pen and the ink and draw this leaf. I mean, I really hope that you found that useful, those of you that like drawing in ink. Even if you're drawing with your ordinary pen, you can still use the acrylic paint to cover that up. Thanks for watching today. I will link these inks. If you haven't got them, they might be worth you having a look at. They're good fun, and because they're permanent you can paint over the top of them. That's great. So I'll link those down in the description, and anything you want to ask, if you just pop that in the comments, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Enjoy your drawing, and bye for now.